Thanks, Brian. It's my pleasure to report the progress towards lake trout rehabilitation in Lake Michigan because we do have some very positive signs to point to in this report. So today the format of this presentation will be to present the objective as defined in the rehabilitation guide written by Chuck Bronte and others, then show the results in text form, and then move to a figure form where we can actually see the data plotted, most time in time series. And that'll be the format for today's presentation. So this is a very collaborative effort. If we're going to report on progress on a lake-wide level, we need to involve all of the agencies across the lake. That includes the DNRs from the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, the tribes, including the Chippewa-Ottawa Resource Authority, the Little River Band of Ottawa Indians, the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Ottawa Indians, and the Grand Traverse Bay Band of Chippewa and Ottawa Indians, as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So it's a very collaborative effort. We need all the partners on the lake to get together to gauge the progress towards lake trout restoration on a lake-wide basis. And so objective one is to increase the genetic diversity of lake trout in Lake Michigan by stocking deep water morphs into the lake as well as shallow water morphs. And the result that we can report to today is that over 200,000 of the Klondike Reef strain, which is a deep water strain, were stocked into Northeast Reef in the southern refuge of the lake during 2014. This is the second year that this stocking has occurred. With regard to the lean forms, we continue stocking the Lewis Lake strain and the Seneca Lake strain, as well as the Perry Sound, which began, that stocking effort began last year. We do report the discontinuing of the Green Lake strain and the Apostle Island Lake Superior strain. That stocking is discontinued, and those brood stocks are no longer being maintained in the hatcheries. And so if we look at the sites that we conduct our surveys at, they're in numbers, and they are outlined in the Lake-Wide Assessment Plan, or LWAP plan, written by Phil Schneeberger and others back in the late 90s. And the numbers represent the locations of the LWAP sites here. The Northern Refuge Reef Complex falls mainly in Statistical District MM3, I want to point out, and the Southern Refuge, or Mid-Lake Refuge, a good chunk of it falls in WM5, and in fact, the sampling locations are all contained in, or most of them are contained in WM5. And again, the numbers represent these different LWAP sites, in that these are surveyed in the spring, but in most cases, the fall survey is conducted very close to or right on these LWAP sites. Objective 2 is to increase the lake-wide abundance of lake trout in Lake Michigan, and to gauge the progress towards that, towards accomplishing that objective by attaining spring CPUEs at 25 fish per 1,000 feet of gill net. And we have to report this year that on a lake-wide basis, we are well under achieving that objective of 25 fish per 1,000 feet of net in the spring surveys. But there have been times where we see that objective either being met or being very close to being met at several of the locations here outlined here in this text. But if we turn to the data, you can see that at times we do get close or well exceeded. For example, in the Southern Refuge, even at Waukegan down in Illinois. But in 2014, on a lake-wide average, we were only at 7.1 fish per 1,000 feet of net. So we are well under it at this time. Objective 3 is to increase the lake trout spawner abundance in Lake Michigan so that we see at least 50 spawners per 1,000 feet of gillnet in the fall spawner surveys. And I'm happy to report that in 2014, the lake-wide average was exceeded 50 fish per 1,000 feet of net. And we see that we exceeded that mark at 4 of the 7 places that were surveyed. In fact, at the Southern Refuge, we're at 120 fish per 1,000 feet of net for the second year in a row. And even in the northern part of the lake, there are some positive signs of 37 at Little Traverse Bay. I should mention also that the Lake Trout Working Group met at the fall meeting back in Illinois in January, and we decided that we are now including the fishery independent whitefish survey results along with the surveys that target lake trout specifically. We do exclude the 2-inch mesh from those surveys as well as the effort when reporting the results and consolidating with the lake trout targeted surveys in these reports. So let's look at the fall results again for the fall spawners, well exceeding it in Illinois and at Sheboygan and Milwaukee, very far above it in the Southern Refuge, and even at Clay Banks at Sturgeon Bay, we're well over that 50 fish per 1,000 feet of net. And in the past, we have exceeded it at places like Grand Traverse Bay, although last year was a bad year, probably because of the rotten weather that we had in October and early November. In the Northern Refuge, we're well under it, but we are slowly increasing upward even there. Have exceeded it quite a bit in the past at Leland as well. So on a lake-wide average basis, we are over the 50 fish per 1,000 feet of net target. Objective 4 is to see in the fall spawner survey at least 25% females by sex composition, and to see at least 10 age groups that exceed the age of 7 in the fall spawner nets. And I can report that on a lake-wide basis, we have exceeded the 25% female mark for over the course of the surveys since '99. In 2014, at 4 of the 7 sites, we are over that 25%. And we did assemble some age composition this year, and based on those, the available age composition data at the time of the report, we are happy to report that we do have 10 age groups over the age 7 in 2014. So you can see that overall, we're either well above the 25% or getting close to it, on average above that 25% female mark in the fall spawner survey. And in looking at the age group composition, or the age composition for 2014, we can count 10 age groups over age 7 from age 8 all the way out to age 18 in the fall spawner survey. So we are meeting that mark as well. And you do see some wild fish in quite a few groups as well, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Objective 5 is to observe at least 500, I think it's 500 viable eggs per meter squared, and have those eggs with at least 4 nanomoles per gram of thiamine. We don't do egg surveys in most of the lake, but some egg surveys have been done in Grand Traverse Bay and Little Traverse Bay, and we are well under that 500 average of 500 eggs per meter squared at those locations. And we have been under that, well under that mark for most of the time series. I did just received the 2014 eggs. Sorry, I don't have them in the graph from Jory Jonas, but 2014 is very similar to 2013 for those sites that are surveyed in Grand Traverse Bay and Little Traverse Bay. Objective 6 is to see signs of wild recruitment or natural reproduction by lake trout by observing them, the age 1s in the bottom trawl, detecting age 3s in the gillnets, and subadults in other surveys. And in general, we definitely see a substantial increase in natural reproduction by lake trout in Lake Michigan in the last 10 years. There's no doubt about it. The spring surveys show on an average for the entire lake, the spring surveys show an average of 6.5% unclipped fish. So there is a definite sign of some natural reproduction. This is a substantial increase over the 1.2% prior to 2004, but there are even quite a bit more positive signs than that, and we'll look at those right now. In spring 2014, the percent unclipped at Waukegan or in Illinois waters in the Southern Refuge were 19% and 11% in the spring surveys. In the fall surveys, the percent unclipped rose at Illinois all the way up to 54% and 22% at the Southern Refuge. So definitely some signs of natural reproduction. And even in the north, we see 11% in Little Traverse Bay. So here are the time series. The solid dots are the results from the spring survey. The open circles are from the fall survey. And again, very positive signs in Illinois waters, all the way up to 54% in Illinois waters, unclipped fish or wild fish. And even in the spring surveys, up to 19%. At the Southern Refuge in WN5, all the way up to 22% in the fall, 11% in the spring. But we see some modest increases in some of the other statistical districts as well, with the 11% from Little Traverse Bay and MM3 here. So again, positive signs of natural reproduction occurring in Lake Michigan, but we also have some other indicators of that, which we'll get to right now. And I want to point out that these positive signs do coincide with a reduced abundance of alewives, as shown by the USGS bottom trawl survey between from the 2004 time period to the present time. Very reduced numbers of alewives, and I don't think it's a coincidence. But here are the other signs. There are in the bycatch of lake trout from the bloater effort to rehabilitate Lake Ontario with bloaters during the winter time, both in the gill nets and the trawling that is done in the month of February. 20% of the lake trout that were taken were unclipped fish, and this is talked about in a paper by Dale Hansen and others, just published recently in North American Journal of Fisheries Management. And then from the Great Lakes Mass Marking Program, we see more positive signs in the angler returns from the Headhunter survey. We see a definite gradient of percent unclipped lake trout taken by anglers, with the highest percentage in the southern region of the lake at 22%, next at 13% from the middle of the lake, 13% unclipped lake trout, and in the northern region of the lake, just 2%. So a definite gradient from the south to the north, but a positive sign, I would characterize at a lake-wide level that we probably have percent unclipped adult lake trout in Lake Michigan at somewhere between 10 and 15%. More positive signs. And then finally, if we look at the USGS bottom troll survey for Lake Michigan, we get a chance to see from a long-term perspective what's going on with natural reproduction of lake trout in Lake Michigan. I want to point out that for the first time that a wild age 0 lake trout was taken in the survey, which, if you saw Bo Bonnell's talk, began in 1973. The first time that an age 0 wild fish was taken in the survey was in September 2010. I think that says something just by itself. But we also see in 2014 that 3 out of the 6 lake trout that were caught were unclipped fish, including 1 age 0 wild fish at the Frankfurt transect. I will say that when we do get wild age 0 lake trout in the bottom troll survey, they're either at Frankfurt, which actually is closer to Arcadia, where we do the transect, or Waukegan, which jives with the high percent unclipped fish seen in the gillnet surveys. Since 2005, 27 of the 133 lake trout that have been caught in the bottom troll survey, or 20%, were unclipped. And prior to 2005, less than 2% of the lake trout taken in the bottom troll survey were unclipped. So quite a contrast there. And again, the timing is such that you have to believe that some of it is attributed to the reduced levels of alewives in the lake. Finally, objective 7, 75% or more of the lake trout in the deep and shallow water habitats should be age 10 and younger and of wild origin. Well, we're far from that, but if you recall from the figure I showed earlier, we do see wild lake trout in a bunch of different age groups from 4 to 11. So another positive sign of some natural reproduction out in the lake over the span of quite a few age groups out in Lake Michigan. In 2014, 2.95 million yearling lake trout were stocked into Lake Michigan, about 1.48 million within the Northern Refuge Reef Complex, another 0.74 million in the Southern Refuge Reef Complex, and then an additional 0.73 million in more nearshore areas of the lake. In addition, 0.48 million fall fingerling lake trout were stocked into Lake Michigan during 2014. And if you want more details about that, you can see the summary of 2014 lake trout and salmonid stocking in Lake Michigan report, which I think is available in the back of the room. So to summarize, we definitely see a lot of positive signs in Lake Michigan with regard to the lake trout restoration effort. Again, I'm happy to report that for a lake-wide average, we're exceeding the 50 fish per 1,000 feet of net fall spawner mark in Lake Michigan in 2014. We have been exceeding the objective of 25% females in the fall spawner surveys regularly in Lake Michigan. Looking at the available age distribution data, we have met the mark of 10 age groups older than the age 7. And we, on a lake-wide average, we can estimate that between 10 and 15% of the adult lake trout out in Lake Michigan at present are wild fish or unclipped fish. Natural reproduction by lake trout has definitely increased in Lake Michigan in the last 10 years substantially. This increase coincides with reduced alewife abundance. The hotspot for natural reproduction appears to be Illinois waters as well as the Southern Refuge. But there are some signs in an isolated area near Arcadia in MM5 based on the bottom troll survey. But we still are well under, on a lake-wide basis, well under the spring survey mark of 25 fish per 1,000 feet of net. And that's all I have. I'll be glad to answer questions at this time.